I knew something was off the moment I opened the door. Two men stood on my porch wearing police uniforms that didn't quite fit. The badges were wrong, the holsters sat too high, and the way they carried themselves, not law enforcement. One of them, a stocky guy with a clipboard, gave me a practiced frown. "Sir, we've received complaints that you're violating neighborhood security regulations. We need to see some identification." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "That's so?" The second man, taller and thinner, shifted uncomfortably. His hand rested on his belt, but there was no radio, no utility gear, nothing a real cop would have. That's when I spotted her. Across the street, standing behind a row of hedges, Karen Sullivan watched with a smug little smile. HOA president, neighborhood dictator, and apparently a woman who thought she could intimidate me with fake cops. I had dealt with actual criminals in my time with the FBI. Cartel enforcers, corrupt politicians, professional con men. Karen was playing checkers in a game she didn't even understand. I exhaled slowly, letting my eyes drift back to the two men. "You boys got a precinct you report to?" Clipboard Guy barely hesitated. "We're with the county sheriff's department." I smiled. "Wrong answer." I straightened, stepping just a little closer. The taller one immediately stiffened. Good. That meant he knew I wasn't buying this. "Tell you what," I said casually, reaching into my pocket. "Let's call the actual sheriff's office and clear this up." I pulled out my phone, flipping through my contacts until I landed on a very familiar number. Clipboard Guy paled. "That won't be necessary." I glanced over at Karen. Her smug expression was starting to crack. Then I looked back at the two impostors and smirked. "You sure? Because I'd really love to hear what they have to say." The taller one swallowed hard, his eyes flicked toward Karen, waiting for some kind of signal. She didn't give one, because for the first time, she realized her little plan had gone horribly, horribly wrong. I kept my posture relaxed, my expression unreadable. If these guys thought they were intimidating me, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Clipboard Guy squared his shoulders, still playing the part. "You need to understand, sir, this isn't just about HOA rules. It's about keeping the neighborhood safe." I almost laughed. Safe? The biggest threat to this neighborhood was standing right behind them. Karen Sullivan, arms crossed, watching like a queen overseeing her kingdom. I could feel her smug satisfaction from where I stood. I let out a slow breath, feigning submission. "All right," I said, reaching for my wallet, "let's make this easy." Both fake cops relaxed slightly, thinking they had won. What they didn't see? My thumb discreetly tapping the record button on my phone, which was now capturing every single word of this ridiculous little shakedown. Clipboard Guy continued, emboldened. "Since you've refused to cooperate with the HOA, we're giving you 24 hours to vacate the property." Tall guy nodded, trying to look menacing but failing. "If you don't leave willingly, we can't guarantee things won't escalate." Ah! There it was. The thinly veiled threat. I smirked. "Escalate how exactly?" Clipboard Guy hesitated for half a second too long. Then he doubled down. "That's up to you, sir." I let the silence drag. Let them think they were in control. Then, with an easy, casual tone, I said, "I'll leave right now." Clipboard Guy perked up. "If you have a valid arrest warrant." The porch went silent. Clipboard Guy flinched. His mouth opened, then closed, as if his brain had short-circuited. Tall guy took an involuntary step back. Good. He was figuring it out. This wasn't a regular homeowner they were dealing with. But Karen wasn't that smart. She let out a scoff, stepping forward, her voice sharp with authority she didn't actually have. "This is my neighborhood," she snapped, her face red with fury. "I get to decide who lives here." I turned to her, locking eyes, letting my smirk grow just enough to make her uneasy. "Karen," I said slowly, my tone almost amused, "you just admitted to impersonating a police officer." I let my words sink in before adding, "in front of witnesses and security cameras." Karen's smugness evaporated instantly. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Clipboard Guy's face drained of color. Tall guy? He just looked like he regretted every decision that had led him to this exact moment. They had just realized they had messed with the wrong guy, and they had no idea just how bad it was about to get. Karen should have backed off. Most people, after nearly getting caught impersonating law enforcement, would have laid low, rethought their strategy. But Karen, she doubled down. The very next morning, a thick envelope appeared in my mailbox. HOA violation notice, stamped in big red letters. I opened it, skimming through the ridiculous charges. Unauthorized vehicle on premises. $5,000 fine for my legally registered SUV. Failure to comply with HOA landscaping regulations. $10,000 fine for my own damn trees. Disrupting neighborhood harmony. $20,000 fine, whatever that meant. Total $30,000 due immediately. I chuckled and tossed the letter aside. She was testing me, seeing if she could push me into writing a check just to make her go away. But I wasn't like the others. And Karen? She had just made her first real mistake. The fake fines didn't work, so she escalated. 2 nights later, my electricity went out. I checked the breakers. Nothing. Walked outside, flashlight in hand, and found the problem. The meter had been tampered with, not just a simple mistake. Deliberate sabotage. And the next morning, no running water. I made a few calls, spoke with the city, checked service records. Turns out Karen had bribed public service workers to have my utilities accidentally shut off. Felony number 2. Then came the vandalism. At first it was small, trash dumped in my yard, tire marks across my driveway. Then it escalated. One morning, I stepped outside to find my fence slashed with a knife. My garden completely destroyed. Deep gashes in the wood, flowers ripped from the soil, my mailbox smashed into pieces. I knew exactly who was behind it, but I still didn't fight back. Not yet. Because while Karen thought she was winning, what she didn't realize, every move she made was pushing herself closer and closer to federal charges. She was getting reckless, and I was documenting everything. The other residents, they watched. Silently. I could see it in their eyes, the hesitation, the guilt. They knew what Karen was capable of. They had seen her force families out before, had watched as she made their lives miserable until they had no choice but to leave. Fear had kept them in line for years. I didn't blame them. But what they didn't know, what Karen didn't know, was that I wasn't afraid of her. And soon, she was going to wish she had never started this war. I didn't fight back immediately. Karen expected me to react, to argue, to threaten legal action, maybe even to leave like all the others had. That was how she operated. Intimidation, fear, control. But what she didn't realize was that I had already started building my case. And when I struck back, it wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be messy, it would be the end of her. Step 1, watch and record. Karen and her inner circle had gotten comfortable over the years. Too comfortable. They held their HOA board meetings behind closed doors, convinced that no one could hear what they were really saying. But I had a few tricks up my sleeve. A well-placed recording device in the community center's meeting room was all it took. And within a week, I had everything. Recordings of Karen ordering police harassment against specific homeowners. Proof that she had been forging violations to pressure families into selling their homes. Her admitting that she took care of my power and water situation. She had been careless, too wrapped up in her own arrogance to realize she was building my case for me. Step 2, follow the money. I knew Karen was dirty. I just needed to prove it. So I dug into the HOA's financials. HOAs are supposed to have transparent accounting, but under Karen's leadership, everything was a black hole, money flowing in, but never accounted for. What I found? Hundreds of thousands in resident fees laundered through fake vendor contracts. Luxury vacations, personal home renovations, and consulting fees paid directly to Karen's private accounts. Evidence of offshore transfers, money disappearing into shell companies she thought no one would ever find. I didn't just find fraud. I found federal crimes. Step 3, the fake cops. Karen's biggest mistake? Trying to scare me with fake law enforcement. She thought her 2 hired goons were untouchable, that they could intimidate me into backing down, but I had been tracking them, following them after their shift. And one night, I got exactly what I needed. I caught them purchasing fake badges and uniforms straight from a black market website known for selling counterfeit law enforcement gear. That wasn't just a scam. That was impersonating federal officers, a felony with serious prison time attached. Karen had been playing dirty for years. And now, I had enough evidence to bury her and her entire operation. Step 4. The final piece. But I didn't just want Karen arrested. I wanted her entire empire to collapse in front of her eyes. So I made a call to a federal attorney, someone who owed me a favor from my FBI days. I sent them a small piece of what I had, just enough to make them interested. And then I sat back, watching, waiting. Because Karen wasn't just on borrowed time anymore. She had already dug her own grave. And all I had to do now was let her fall into it. Karen thought this was her moment of victory. She had stacked the deck, handpicked her audience, and convinced herself that this meeting would be the final nail in my coffin. She was so sure that after tonight, I'd be gone, just like the others she had driven out before. But what she didn't realize, what she never even considered, was that this wasn't her game anymore. It was mine. The HOA meeting was held in the community center, packed with residents. Karen stood at the front, dressed in one of her signature pastel power suits, her expression one of pure arrogance. The moment I walked in, I could feel the tension, people whispering, waiting to see what she had planned. She didn't waste time. "Neighbors," she began, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "It pains me to say this, but our community is under attack." She dramatically placed a thick manila folder on the table, flipping it open. "Jonathan Carter," she said, looking at me like I was a criminal on trial, "is not who he claims to be." She held up printed documents, forged records, fake reports, all designed to make me look like a dangerous man with a past to hide. "This man," she continued, "has a criminal history, multiple aliases, and ties to organizations that threaten our neighborhood's safety." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some people nodded. Others exchanged uncertain glances. And Karen? Karen was so confident in her trap that she didn't notice the shift in the room, didn't notice how people weren't reacting the way she expected, didn't notice that her grip on them was already slipping. Then, finally, she turned to me. "Well?" she asked, her lips curling. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" I took my time. Then, slowly, I stood up, reaching into my bag. "You know, Karen," I said, placing a much thicker folder onto the table right next to hers. "That's interesting." I leaned forward slightly, "but I think the residents here would rather see some real evidence." I flipped open my folder. Page after page of documents spread across the table. Bank records showing Karen embezzled hundreds of thousands in resident fees. Emails and transcripts proving she had orchestrated false violations to force people to sell their homes. Forged contracts, where she had illegally transferred properties to her own shell companies. A detailed report tracking the fake police uniforms back to a black market vendor. And at the very top, a signed affidavit from a federal investigator confirming that Karen was already under criminal investigation. The room went dead silent. Karen's face drained of color. Her hands trembled as she snatched one of the papers, her eyes darting across the text. Then she let out a shrill, desperate laugh. "This is fake, all of it." She turned wildly to the residents. "He's lying. He's trying to set me up." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because for the first time, they saw Karen for what she really was. Not a leader, not a protector, just a petty, corrupt tyrant who had finally lost control. Her voice cracked as she turned back to me, furious. "Who do you think you are to stand up to me?" she screamed. I let the moment stretch. Then I smirked. "I'm the guy the FBI calls," I said calmly, "when they need to clean up people like you." Karen's breath hitched. And that's when the doors burst open, and the real authorities walked in. The doors burst open, and suddenly, the room was filled with FBI agents and uniformed officers. Gasps rippled through the crowd as residents turned in shock, some scrambling back in their chairs, others instinctively reaching for their phones. Karen whipped around, her expression morphing from outrage to pure panic. As the agents fanned out, their presence imposing, methodical, absolute. She had spent years bullying this neighborhood, terrorizing homeowners and manipulating people into submission. But now she was the one trapped. At the front of the group, a tall, broad-shouldered agent stepped forward, holding up a thick folder in one hand and an arrest warrant in the other. His voice rang out, sharp, commanding, and final. "Karen Sullivan, you are under arrest for impersonating a police officer, financial fraud, and abuse of power." The room erupted in whispers. Some people gasped, others muttered in disbelief, and a few, they just stared wide-eyed as the reality of what was happening finally sank in. Karen stumbled back, her perfect posture cracking for the first time. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again as if she was struggling to breathe. Her hands trembled, clutching the edge of the table as if it could somehow save her from what was coming. Then, in a wild, desperate move, she turned, her manicured finger stabbing the air in my direction. "It's him!" she shrieked. "He set me up! He's dangerous! You don't know what he's capable of!" Her voice bordered on hysteria, but it didn't matter. Nobody in that room believed her anymore, least of all the agent standing in front of her. He turned to me, his lips twitching slightly in amusement before letting out a short, knowing chuckle. "Oh, Karen," he said, shaking his head. "Do you have any idea who Mr. Carter is?" Karen's face froze, her breath hitching. The agent smirked slightly before flipping through the file in his hands. "Former FBI agent. Specialized in investigating high-level financial crimes. The kind of guy who takes down people who think they're untouchable." Karen's eyes went wide, her body going rigid as realization smashed into her like a freight train. Everything she had done, every fake fine, every bribe, every forged document, hadn't been used against some ordinary homeowner. She had gone after a man who used to put people like her away for a living. I leaned back slightly, watching as the agents moved in, their voices calm, practiced, efficient. Karen lunged backward, trying to scramble for an exit, but there was nowhere to go. The cuffs snapped shut around her wrists, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't the one giving the orders. She was the one being taken away. Her reign had ended, and she had never even seen it coming. The fall of the HOA was swift and brutal. With Karen gone, the FBI turned their full attention to the corrupt empire she had built. Investigators combed through financial records, tracing every fraudulent fee, embezzled dollar, and illegal land transfer. One by one, the entire HOA board was charged with complicity. Treasurer, secretary, even Karen's hand-picked enforcers. Every shady deal, every forged contract, every stolen cent exposed. Their accounts frozen, their assets seized, and the HOA itself dissolved permanently. For the first time in over a decade, the residents of the neighborhood were free. No more fines, no more threats, no more Karen. And as for the stolen money, the government confiscated the HOA's funds and returned them to the very people Karen had extorted. Justice had finally been served. Karen's trial was a spectacle. She fought. She hired the best lawyers money could buy, tried to plead ignorance, even attempted to frame others for her crimes. But the evidence was overwhelming. Every fraudulent transaction, every recorded conversation, every illegal act she had ever committed, she never stood a chance. The courtroom was dead silent as the judge read the sentence: 25 years in federal prison. No parole, no appeal, no escape. Karen staggered, gripping the table as if it could somehow change her fate. Her empire? Gone. Her power? Gone. Her influence? Destroyed. And the worst part, she had done it all to herself. As the guards prepared to escort her away, she did something unexpected. She turned to me. Her hands trembled. Her once unbreakable confidence shattered beyond repair. For the first time, she didn't look at me with arrogance or contempt. She looked at me with fear. Her voice, weak and hoarse, barely made it out. "Why didn't you do something in the first place?" I let the question hang in the air. Then I gave her a small, knowing smile. "Because," I said simply, "I like to let my enemies dig their own graves first." She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say another word, the guards led her away. And just like that, Karen Sullivan was nothing but a bad memory. With the HOA gone, the neighborhood changed overnight. The ridiculous rules that had dictated every inch of people's lives, gone. No more letters about grass being half an inch too tall, no more threats over parking spots, no more arbitrary fees draining residents' wallets, and most importantly, no more Karen. For the first time in over a decade, people felt free in their own homes. Some celebrated immediately. The Johnsons down the street threw a barbecue, the first real gathering in years. with music blasting, kids running in and out of yards without anyone threatening to find them. Someone even put up Christmas lights, months out of season, just because they could. Others took a quieter approach, simply enjoying the silence that came with knowing they wouldn't wake up to another HOA violation taped to their door. And then there were the ones who still couldn't quite believe it. For so long, Karen had ruled with an iron fist, and even with her gone, some people kept looking over their shoulders, as if expecting her to reappear with some new scheme. But she wasn't coming back, ever. As for me, I did what I always did. I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, watching it all unfold, and sure enough, it wasn't long before some of the braver ones approached me. A small group, men and women who had lived under Karen's rule for years, walked up, a mix of curiosity and gratitude on their faces. One of them, a man named Tom, cleared his throat. "John, I just wanted to say thank you." Another woman, Mrs. Rodriguez, nodded. "A lot of us thought Karen was untouchable. We never would have stood up to her if you hadn't." She trailed off, studying me. There it was. The real question. Finally, Tom just said it out loud. "So, what do you do exactly?" A moment of silence passed. I could feel all of them watching me, waiting for an answer. I took another slow sip of coffee, letting the question hang in the air before I shrugged. "I used to do some cleaning," I said casually. Tom frowned. "Cleaning?" I glanced at him, smirking slightly. "But not cleaning houses." For a split second, the air shifted. The realization flickered across their faces, some understanding more than others. Tom opened his mouth like he wanted to ask something else, but then he stopped, because deep down, nobody really wanted to know the full answer, and that was just how I liked it. Karen had spent years making people listen to her. She had controlled every aspect of the neighborhood, barking orders, handing out fines, and forcing her will on everyone. But now, nobody cared what she had to say. In prison, Karen Sullivan did not go quietly. From the moment she was locked up, she screamed her innocence to anyone who would listen. She filed appeal after appeal, trying to convince the courts that she had been set up, betrayed, unfairly punished. None of it worked, and when she finally got a news station to interview her, she took her chance, one last opportunity to reclaim her power. The clip aired that afternoon. Her orange jumpsuit was wrinkled, her hair no longer in its perfect bob, but she still tried to carry herself like a leader. She leaned toward the camera, eyes burning with rage. "I'm the one who makes the rules in that neighborhood," she hissed. I was framed. But this time, nobody was listening. The news anchors moved on without a second thought, treating her outburst as nothing more than background noise. Her kingdom was gone. Her power was gone. Her voice, meaningless. Across town, I sat in a quiet coffee shop, watching the report play on a mounted TV. I didn't need to hear the sound to know exactly what she was saying. I could see it in her face. The desperation, the fury, the complete and utter disbelief that she had lost. I let the moment linger. Then I simply smiled, took a slow sip of my coffee, and turned my attention back to my newspaper. Karen could scream all she wanted, but for the first time in her life, no one was listening. The neighborhood had settled into its newfound peace. No more HOA meetings, no more Karen, no more fear. People had moved on, but every now and then, curiosity lingered. One evening, as I sat on my porch with a fresh cup of coffee, a neighbor, Tom, the same guy who had once asked what I did for a living, strolled up and leaned against the railing. He hesitated for a moment, then finally asked, "John, are you ever afraid that the HOA will come back?" I exhaled slowly, letting the question hang in the air. Then I chuckled, low, amused, unbothered. I looked at him, smirking slightly. "No," I said simply. I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the warmth settle. Then I added, "I don't let the enemy come back twice." Tom blinked, his expression shifting, not quite fear, not quite understanding, but somewhere in between. He gave a small nod, then walked away, not asking anything else. Because deep down he knew, some battles only need to be fought once.